Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Wednesday, 9th July 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Ukraine is facing an escalation in the war with Russia, as President Putin believes Moscow's battlefield superiority is growing, and that Ukraine's defenses may collapse in the coming months. This includes a record attack involving 728 Shah and decoy drones, along with 13 missiles, highlighting Ukraine's urgent need for weapons. Kyiv was hit by a large wave of Russian strikes, resulting in 2 deaths and multiple injuries. Ukrainian air defenses repelled a Russian drone attack on Kyiv, with Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reporting fires in the Shevchenkivsky district. The Kyiv military administration reported the threat of drones and ballistic weapons, urging residents to seek shelter. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia committed human rights violations in Ukraine since 2014, including extrajudicial killings, sexual violence, forced labor, attacks on religious groups and journalists, and was responsible for the downing of flight MS-17. Amidst these tensions, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is scheduled to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Malaysia. Lavrov will also visit North Korea, signaling deepening ties between the two countries during the ongoing war in Ukraine. A Russian court ordered a local event organizer to pay Kodansha limited 3.75 million rubles, $48,000, for the unauthorized use of its manga works, including Attack on Titan. In the United States, momentum is building behind a bipartisan bill to impose sanctions on countries that purchase Russian oil. Meanwhile, the United States announced sanctions against Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the West Bank and Gaza, for investigating human rights abuses in the Palestinian territories. Albanese dismissed the penalties as mafia-style intimidation techniques. President Trump also attacked former FBI and CIA heads amid reports that John Brennan and James Comey are under investigation over the Trump-Russia probe. Analysts suggest Trump's call for a ceasefire in Gaza needs to be backed by as leverage to push Israel to conclude negotiations. President Trump imposed a 50% tariff on copper imports as part of escalating trade pressures with China. As President Trump's 90-day window for reciprocal tariff negotiations concluded, letters were delivered to 14 trade partners, reconfirming the April tariff levels or making slight adjustments. The total number of trade deals concluded stands at 2, with Vietnam and Britain, not including the framework agreement with China. The TSA has required travelers to remove their shoes during airport security screenings for nearly 2 decades. Turning to China, a report by Strategy Risks indicates that the country is expected to maintain a strategic edge over the United States in the rare earth industry, due to long-term investments in advanced mining and processing technologies. Representative John Molnar, head of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, is urging 7 American universities to reconsider partnerships with a Chinese scholarship organization over national security concerns. Finally, in New Zealand, a U.S.-born neo-Nazi hate group remains on the country's terrorism watch list, aiming for a violent overthrow of governments to create white ethnostates. South Korea recently saw former President Yoon Suk Yeol arrested again after a court approved a warrant related to his alleged attempt to impose martial law in December, which included deploying armed soldiers to parliament. Lawmakers had previously impeached him on December 14th, and he was indicted on January 26 for allegedly plotting a rebellion to seize the legislature and election offices and detain political opponents. The Seoul Central District Court cited concerns about evidence destruction in its decision to issue the detention warrant, supporting the Special Counsel investigation into obstruction of justice and abuse of power allegations. Yoon, ousted in April after the Constitutional Court upheld his impeachment, attended a hearing at the Seoul court and had been released from prison in March. In other developments, South Korea repatriated 6 North Korean fishermen whose boats drifted into its waters, signaling a potential effort to improve relations with North Korea. Climate change has also impacted South Korea, leading to shorter rainy seasons in parts of the country. Furthermore, South Korean fishers had to discard over 1,300 bluefin tuna, worth about $90 million, due to exceeding their fishing quota, sparking debate about more flexible limits. Lastly, actress Lee Se-young's choice to undergo IVF for her second child without her ex-husband's consent has triggered a debate on reproductive rights and parental duties within South Korea. Gaza and Israel are still embroiled in conflict, with truce talks described as difficult due to obstacles such as aid flow, military withdrawal, and guarantees for lasting peace. Hamas wants a partial hostage release, conditioned on a permanent end to the war. Israel wants to maintain troops in southern Gaza, raising fears of lasting control. President Trump believes a ceasefire deal is possible soon. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed. Over 700 Palestinians have been killed attempting to collect aid from us and Israel-backed HAF sites. Doctors report hundreds wounded by Israeli gunfire while trying to reach the GAF sites. A British surgeon, Dr. Victoria Rose, described treating patients shot while seeking food. Footage shows Israel installing mobile housing units in Hebron. Turning to Lebanon, the Israeli army announced special targeted operations in the south, with the 9th Brigade operating in Labana and the 300th Brigade in Jabal Black. In Iran, the June 23 airstrikes on Evin prison, including the hospital ward, have incited fury against Israel, even among the regime's domestic critics. The United States is seeing President Trump host Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to work on a Gaza ceasefire and is also resuming military aid shipments to Ukraine after a temporary halt. Within the European Union, the force patrolling the Red Sea reported 3 killed and at least 2 injured in an attack on the Eternity Sea. Finally, the United Nations has released a new report by Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, highlighting that genocides committed or sponsored by the West have often been a highly profitable business. China's economic trajectory reveals a complex interplay of growth strategies and underlying vulnerabilities. Despite a government pivot towards consumption-driven growth, mega projects remain a priority, even as questions persist about the validity of official GDP figures. Consumer inflation is on the rise, and Chinese AI stocks are expected to benefit from the technology's potential to enhance business efficiency and stimulate economic growth. Intense competition in emerging industries is causing prices to plummet, prompting government intervention. To address unemployment, China is offering subsidies to companies that hire unemployed individuals aged 16 to 24. Polysilicon producers in the solar industry are seeking mergers with struggling competitors to alleviate a supply glut and end a price war. As the US dollar weakens, Chinese investors are increasingly turning to overseas assets, boosting the performance of QDE funds. JD.com is investing $1.40 billion to bolster benchmark brands and expand China's on-demand delivery services. However, China's dominance in global shipbuilding is waning, with new orders declining by 68% year-on-year in the first half of 2025. China is also actively regulating healthcare practices and supporting scientific research. The government has halted an unproven surgical procedure for Alzheimer's disease that had gained popularity. Award-winning data scientist Shi Yuan has relocated from the United States to assume a full-time position at Westlake University in China. The Chang'e 6 lunar mission has uncovered evidence suggesting a major asteroid strike may have altered the moon's far side mantle. China's approach to online discourse involves a form of digital authoritarianism, allowing certain types of dissent. The detention of female writers of boys' love content since March has ignited debates about free speech and sexism. A decade after the crackdown on human rights lawyers, activists report their work is nearly impossible. Regarding foreign policy, China denies supplying Iran with air defense systems. Additionally, China has imposed an export ban for Taiwan firms as a warning to separatist forces. Turning to Taiwan, the island nation has commenced its annual 10-day military drills in response to escalating regional tensions, harassment from China, and threats from the People's Liberation Army, including the use of gray zone tactics. These exercises are designed to test Taiwan's readiness for a potential Chinese invasion involving military personnel, firefighters, police, and civil society. Across the Pacific, the United States is grappling with the implications of its trade policies and geopolitical competition with China. Chinese companies are circumventing the U.S. ban on critical mineral exports by shipping them to other countries with a license. President Trump's tariffs are creating friction with U.S. partners and affecting businesses, as exemplified by Cell House in Asheville, NC, which postponed a shipment of dough beds from China due to increased tariffs. Analysts suggest Trump's tax act might create challenges for China, but also present certain benefits. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is actively working to counter China's expanding global influence. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is replacing ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, following Republican criticism, aiming to bolster ties with the Trump administration. Despite the change, Serbia praised Markarova's contributions. Zelensky traveled to Rome for discussions with the Pope and to participate in a Ukraine recovery conference, also meeting with Italian President Sergio Mattarella and Keith Kellogg, U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy for Ukraine and Russia, during which they had a substantive conversation. The Trump administration has resumed sending weapons to Ukraine after a brief pause. Directed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who wanted to assess Pentagon weapons stockpiles. The White House was surprised by this pause. President Trump may also send an additional Patriot missile system to help Ukraine defend against Russian drones and missiles. The European Court has held Russia liable for human rights violations in Ukraine, and the downing of Flight MS-17 in 2014, including the transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. United Kingdom. A study by the Centre for Cities think tank indicates that £5 billion is needed to revive struggling UK town and city centres, highlighting disparities in high street health across the country, with poorer areas having double the proportion of empty shops compared to London. Former Conservative Party Chair Sir Jake Berry defected to Reform UK, marking the most high-profile defection from the Tories to Nigel Farage's party. Berry claimed the Tories have abandoned the British people and wants Reform UK to form the next government, delivering a blow to Kemi Badenoch. President Emmanuel Macron of France is on a state visit to the UK, the first by a French leader since 1928, and is being hosted by the royal family, including King Charles. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron agreed on the need for new solutions to illegal migration. United States. The Trump administration has resumed sending weapons to Ukraine after a pause directed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who wanted to assess Pentagon weapons stockpiles. The White House was reportedly surprised by this pause. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov as the U.S. sends more weapons to Ukraine. President Trump may send an additional Patriot missile system to help Ukraine defend against Russian drones and missiles. Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov The European Court has held Russia liable for human rights violations in Ukraine and the downing of Flight MS-17 in 2014, including the transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. France. President Emmanuel Macron of France is on a state visit to the UK, the first by a French leader since 2008, and is being hosted by the royal family, including King Charles, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and French President Emmanuel Macron agreed on the need for new solutions to illegal migration. Australia is considering funding cuts for universities and artists who fail to combat anti-Semitism, as proposed by anti-Semitism envoy Gillian Siegel. The plan includes banning AI from spreading anti-Jewish hate and granting the government power to deport visitors. Education surrounding anti-Semitism would also be bolstered. Vanuatu seeks visa-free access to Australia as a condition for renewing a strategic pact, emphasizing Australia's visa policy as a point of negotiation. A report on the Queensland CFMO details a culture of violence, intimidation, misogyny, and bullying, including incidents like a fake bomb threat and harassment of safety inspectors. The report has been handed over to the police. In Melbourne, hundreds of people formed a human chain to move books for Hill of Content, the city's oldest bookstore, to its new location after more than a century. Queensland triumphed over New South Wales 24-12 to secure the State of Origin Rugby League Series in Australia, with Queensland dominating the first half with 20 unanswered points. Meanwhile, the British and Irish Lions defeated the Act Brummies 36-24 in Australia, marking their fourth straight victory on their Australian tour, with notable scores from Marcus Smith and Ollie Chessum. France experienced a wildfire on the edge of Marseille, injuring over 100 people before firefighters contained it. This occurred amid widespread wildfires across Europe, including southern France, leading to the temporary closure of Marseille Airport. French police raided the far-right National Rally Party's headquarters, seizing documents and accounting records, causing party president Jordan Bardella to accuse authorities of harassment regarding campaign finances. President Emmanuel Macron stressed the importance of a partnership between the UK and France in artificial intelligence to compete with the US and China and reduce dependency. Shifting focus to the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Emmanuel Macron of France have agreed to a nuclear deterrence pact aimed at fending off threats to Europe. The Bayeux Tapestry, a British masterpiece, will return to England after 900 years and will be displayed in London from September 26 to July 2027. In Tanzania, Isaac, a 35-year-old gay man, is preparing for a dangerous English Channel crossing from a makeshift camp in northern France, seeking refuge and a better life. Turning to New Zealand, Tavita Vanawai will debut as an All Blacks team member for the second France Test. Brazil is facing a potential trade war after former United States President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on all imports from the country. This action was triggered by what Trump described as a witch hunt against former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is currently under investigation for allegedly plotting a coup after his 2022 election defeat. Trump has called for authorities to drop the charges against Bolsonaro. In response, Brazil's current president has vowed to reciprocate the tariffs, escalating tensions between the two nations. The immediate economic impact saw the Brazilian real fall more than 2% against the US dollar following the tariff threat. India faces a complex interplay of domestic unrest and infrastructural vulnerabilities alongside its economic aspirations. Widespread strikes involving millions of Indian laborers reflect deep dissatisfaction with new governmental labor and business regulations, as well as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's privatization agenda and broader economic overhauls. A tragic infrastructure failure in Gujarat state saw the Gambhira Bridge collapse into the Mahasagar River, resulting in at least 9 deaths and the loss of several vehicles. Further compounding concerns, an Indian Air Force jet crashed in western Rajasthan, claiming the lives of both pilots on board. Shifting focus to economic developments, India is actively pursuing strategies to diminish its dependence on China, initiating domestic rare earth magnet production against the backdrop of ongoing trade disputes. The Indian Premier League continues to be a major economic driver, its value now estimated at $18.50 billion, contributing over $11 to the nation's economy each year. A surge in luxury property sales indicates a strong high-end market, exemplified by one housing project selling out rapidly despite a minimum price exceeding $1 million. In its international relations, Prime Minister Modi has emphasized India's commitment to collaboration with Africa, prioritizing cooperative ventures and value creation during his visit to Namibia. Controversially, former U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio asserted that President Trump averted a potential India-Pakistan war by threatening to impose trade restrictions. Conversely, former U.S. President Donald Trump has also cautioned India, alongside other BRICS nations, about a possible 10% tariff, accusing them of being anti-American. Pakistan is grappling with severe flooding due to accelerated glacial melt and monsoon rains since late June, resulting in at least 72 deaths and over 130 injuries. Record temperatures have triggered flash floods and landslides, raising fears of a repeat of the catastrophic 2022 floods. Concurrently, Pakistan aims to strengthen its relationship with Turkey, emphasizing enhanced defense and economic collaboration. Defense Minister Ishaq Dar conveyed Pakistan's desire to utilize Turkey's proficiency in the defense industry. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Defense Minister Yasir Gula visited Pakistan to advance these talks, highlighting the long-standing bond between the nations. Furthermore, a Pakistan Air Force PAF general met with his Chinese counterpart in Islamabad to advocate for greater cooperation in training and technology. Air Chief Marshal Zahir Ahmed Babasidu and Lieutenant General Wang Gang discussed improving operational synergy between their air forces. Japan recently faced evacuations on southern islands due to over 1,700 tremors. The National Police Agency has doubled its staff to counter potential lone wolf attacks following the assassination of former Prime Minister Abe. The Japan Federation of Bar Associations is pushing for interrogation reforms, challenging the hostage justice system. Concerns over anti-immigrant rhetoric have been raised by NGOs before the upper house vote. The JERA purchase deal is set to expand power trading, impacting futures hedging. School lunch. Caterers face financial struggles despite the School Lunch Act of 1954. The price of the Alzheimer's drug lecanemab will decrease by up to 15% from $3 million per patient annually. Expectations are that a potential Trump administration in the U.S. will request increased defense spending from Japan. Emperor Naruhito visited a technical school in Mongolia, where many graduates find employment in Japan. A new book reveals Kim Jong-un's mother's family history of smuggling and her Korean background. Canada is managing trade discussions with the U.S. independently of other nations' negotiations, with the U.S. meanwhile, in Quebec, an armed group is facing terrorism charges for an alleged land seizure plot. The RCMP released a photo showing military-style training, revealing the arrested individual's ties to the Canadian military. Authorities also seized a significant quantity of firearms and explosives. Turning south, the United States recently saw the Supreme Court uphold a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, rejecting a challenge that could have jeopardized healthcare access for millions. The decision preserves the law's structure regarding preventive care coverage. Furthermore, inflation figures released indicate a slight cooling, though concerns about sustained price pressures persist within the Federal Reserve. The central bank is closely monitoring economic data to determine the course of future interest rate adjustments. Across the Atlantic, France is grappling with ongoing protests and strikes against pension reforms. The government's decision to raise the retirement age has triggered widespread discontent. President Macron is facing mounting pressure to address public concerns and find a resolution to the escalating social unrest. The reforms passed despite significant opposition in Parliament. In the latest from Germany, the government is facing scrutiny over its energy policy. A recent report highlighted challenges in transitioning to renewable energy sources. Critics are questioning the pace of the energy transition and its impact on the country's industrial competitiveness. The report suggests a need for greater investment in infrastructure. Shifting to Brazil, President Lula da Silva is working to strengthen ties with other South American nations. He recently concluded a series of diplomatic visits aimed at fostering regional cooperation on trade and environmental issues. Brazil is seeking to play a more prominent role in regional affairs. Lula's focus is on reviving economic integration efforts. Meanwhile, China is experiencing a slowdown in economic growth, raising concerns about its global impact. The government is implementing measures to stimulate domestic demand and support key industries. Analysts are closely watching China's economic performance for signs of further weakness. The property sector remains a significant area of concern. Togo is experiencing heightened political unrest, with at least 10 deaths and 100 arrests linked to ongoing protests against President Faure Gnassingbé's government since June. Bertin Bandiangou claims torture by gendarmes following his arrest for organizing an anti-government protest in Lomé. The United States recently hosted a summit between President Donald Trump and 5 West African leaders at the White House, signaling a potential shift in U.S. policy toward Africa. The emphasis of the new approach is trade over aid, which intends to create lasting economic relationships. This has prompted discussions about the US's strategic rivalry with China and BRICS countries in Africa. In China, concerns are growing over the safety of Chinese nationals in Africa. Kidnappings for ransom are on the rise, particularly in sectors like infrastructure and mineral extraction. The Chinese embassy in South Africa has specifically warned its citizens about a surge in kidnappings targeting Chinese women. Furthermore, Chinese fishing vessels are increasingly vulnerable to piracy off the coasts of Somalia and Ghana. Yemen's Houthi militia claimed responsibility for a deadly attack in the Red Sea. This attack sank a Liberian-flagged cargo ship. The U.S. attributes Iranian backing to the Houthis. Sailors were taken hostage. 6 of the 25 crew members were rescued. Those rescued included Filipinos and an Indian. The Houthis' actions threaten a May ceasefire with the U.S. The United Nations reports that over 17 million people in Yemen are facing hunger. More than 1 million children are suffering from acute malnutrition. Kenyan President William Ruto has intensified his response to anti-government protests. He alleges the protests aim to overthrow his government. Widespread discontent stems from economic stagnation, corruption, and police brutality. Ruto has directed police to shoot protesters targeting businesses in the legs. This follows the deaths of 31 people during recent demonstrations in Nairobi. Ruto has labeled these demonstrations as acts of terrorism and violence. Syria is facing a multifaceted crisis marked by security threats, environmental devastation, and unresolved political tensions. A recent bombing outside a church near Damascus has instilled fear within the Christian community. Discussions between the Syrian government and Kurdish forces regarding potential unification are currently stalled, highlighting ongoing disagreements. The nation is also experiencing its worst drought in decades, exacerbating wildfires that have consumed an area comparable to Washington, D.C. In a surprising development, Syria and Israel have engaged in communications, finding common ground in their mutual opposition to Iran. Turkey's legal system has blocked Elon Musk's AI chatbot Grok, citing offensive content directed at President Erdogan. Simultaneously, Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the Kurdish PKK, has announced the cessation of armed conflict within Turkey, urging a shift towards political negotiation. The country's media environment continues to reflect government influence, with more than 95% of news outlets supporting the administration. Critical channels have faced penalties, including a 10-day broadcast prohibition for the two largest dissenting networks. Guatemala is grappling with the aftermath of a series of earthquakes and aftershocks that began Tuesday. 4 fatalities have been confirmed. The initial quake, measuring 5.7 in magnitude, caused falling rocks to crush a vehicle, killing 2 people. Landslides have also been triggered. Schools in the capital were closed as a precautionary measure. Authorities have recorded over 150 aftershocks since the initial seismic event. The United States saw President Donald Trump commend Liberian President Joseph Boakai on his proficiency in English during a White House gathering with African leaders. Liberia's President Boakai, in turn, expressed his gratitude to Trump and appealed for greater American investment in his country. He also underscored the enduring relationship between Liberia and the U.S. Spain is grappling with political turbulence as Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez unveils new anti-corruption measures following scandals within his Socialist Party. Sanchez affirmed he would not resign. Alberto Núñez Fayol, leader of the opposition, has voiced strong criticism of the proposed measures. In a separate legal matter in Spain, football manager Carlo Ancelotti was handed a 1-year suspended prison sentence for tax fraud. Turning to the United States, Silicon Valley's NVIDIA has reached an unprecedented milestone, achieving a market valuation of over $4 trillion. This makes NVIDIA the first publicly traded company to reach this valuation. Mexico is currently experiencing unrest in its capital, Mexico City, where residents are protesting the displacement they attribute to the rising cost of living. The surge in rent and food prices, according to the protesters, is a direct consequence of the increasing number of remote workers relocating to the city. In the United States, specifically Ruidoso, New Mexico, severe flash flooding caused by intense monsoon rains has led to tragic consequences. The flooding resulted in 3 deaths and the complete destruction of at least 1 home, with eyewitnesses reporting the house being swept away by the powerful floodwaters. The United States saw President Trump host African leaders at the White House. Discussions centered on enhancing economic investment opportunities. Concerns were also raised regarding China's expanding influence in Africa. Meanwhile, China's animated film, Nechatu, a domestic box office hit, is preparing for its United States debut in August. The English-language version of the film will feature the voice acting talents of Michelle Yeoh. Malaysia recently celebrated the 100th birthday of former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, a figure still known for his sharp mind and influence, especially in the Muslim community. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim plans to discuss potential U.S. tariffs with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with specific concerns over a proposed 25% tariff. Israel's military actions in Lebanon have intensified, marked by a new ground incursion and near-daily strikes against Hezbollah targets. These escalations are raising concerns about the viability of achieving a truce in the region. Shifting focus to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed Parliament regarding the ongoing wildfires in British Columbia. He pledged federal support for affected communities and emphasized the need for long-term climate resilience strategies. In the United States, the Federal Reserve announced another interest rate hike, citing persistent inflation despite recent economic cooling. The move aims to further curb spending and investment, but worries persist about a potential recession. Meanwhile, in France, protests continue over pension reforms enacted earlier this year. Demonstrators are demanding the government reconsider, raising the retirement age, leading to clashes with police in several major cities. Germany has reintroduced border checks along its border with Poland. This measure aims to combat illegal immigration and human trafficking. The move has disrupted cross-border commutes and commerce. Separately, Germany accused a Chinese warship of lasering a German maritime patrol aircraft in the Red Sea. Beijing refuted the allegation, stating its military adheres to international law. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faced increasing pressure regarding foreign interference in Canadian elections. Opposition parties demanded a public inquiry into allegations that China and other countries attempted to influence electoral outcomes. The government maintained it, took the allegations seriously, and was reviewing security protocols. In France, protests and strikes continued over President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms. Demonstrators expressed anger at the increase in the retirement age. The government defended the reforms as necessary to ensure the long-term viability of the pension system. The unrest disrupted transportation and public services across the country. European Union, European Commission. President Ursula von der Leyen is navigating a censure vote in the European Parliament. This vote could highlight growing unease about a possible rightward-leaning EU policy. Russia is facing renewed scrutiny from the European Court of Human Rights. The court has delivered several judgments against Russia, citing breaches of international legal standards. Bangladesh is facing tensions as an indigenous group reports death threats linked to a college construction project, urging action against a Bangladesh army officer said to be involved. Qatar has recently played a crucial role in mediating talks between Israel and Hamas. A Qatari delegation met with White House officials before Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the United States. The discussions focused on the ongoing conflict and Qatar's efforts to facilitate communication. The Philippines Defense Chief Gilbert Teodoro dismissed concerns about the U.S. influencing China's activities in the South China Sea. He downplayed the possibility of armed conflict. The Philippines faces a growing problem with online gambling addiction. Rehabilitation centers report that 70% of their clients struggle with this issue. Fiji celebrated a major achievement as its three basketball teams clinched gold, earning spots in the FIBA U23 World Cup and the 2026 Commonwealth Games. A Fijian political observer also predicts that Ratu Tivita Mara, son of Fiji's initial prime minister and newly honored with chiefly status, is poised to enter the political arena. Iran's political landscape is shifting as concerns grow about the succession of 86-year-old Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, particularly after the recent 12-day conflict with Israel, which may have impacted his perceived power. Shifting focus to Israel, tensions remain high following the aforementioned conflict, with ongoing efforts to mediate a lasting ceasefire. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new measures to support small businesses struggling with pandemic-related restrictions, including expanded loan programs and rent subsidies. In the United States, the debate over infrastructure spending continues in Congress, with disagreements between Democrats and Republicans over the size and scope of the proposed bill and how to pay for it. Singapore saw a man's jail sentence more than doubled after an appeal, found his initial 14-month sentence for killing cats was too lenient. He will now serve 27 months. Meanwhile, Singaporean politicians are arranging durian-themed tours to Malaysia for their constituents, offering durian buffets, shopping trips, and communal dinner. Nepal is currently grappling with the aftermath of severe flooding triggered by monsoon rains, with rescuers searching for 19 people still missing while having recovered 9 bodies. During his first visit to Namibia, Prime Minister Modi was awarded the country's highest civilian honor, symbolizing a strengthening of bilateral cooperation between the two nations. Shifting to Sudan, Sudanese author Laila Abuela has been awarded the Pen Pinter Prize for her writing, which centers on migration, faith, and the lives of women. Judges praised her for focusing on Muslim women, describing her work as a source of balm, shelter, and inspiration. In Colombia, criminal organizations are increasingly recruiting child soldiers amid escalating conflicts, while a Colombian soldier was killed and 2 others wounded in an attack involving a mule carrying explosives. France is home to a rare earths factory located in La Rochelle. Sweden continues to be recognized for its unique approach to well-being. In South Sudan, authorities are holding 8 men deported from the United States, only one of whom is a South Sudanese national. The others include 2 individuals from Myanmar, 2 from Cuba, and 1 each from Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico. Turning to Poland, over 1,000 scouts and counselors were evacuated from summer camps due to anticipated heavy rainfall. Nigeria is facing a crisis after bandits ambushed and killed at least 70 community security volunteers in Plateau State, a violence-ridden area in central Nigeria. Togo witnessed the tragic death of a 15-year-old boy, among others, during protests against constitutional changes feared to consolidate the president's power. Somalia is responding to al-Shabaab's claim of responsibility for an explosion at a military training school in Mogadishu, with the Defense Ministry currently investigating the incident. An unusual protest occurred between Thailand and Cambodia, where a Thai man walked 30 km barefoot and splashed fish sauce on a portrait of Cambodia's Hun Sen, expressing his anger over Cambodia's actions during a border. Across Europe, the protected status of wolves has been downgraded, raising concerns among conservationists that this decision may reverse decades of conservation effort. Indonesia is seeing Bali become the 2nd most crowded island in the world after Java, leading to residents feeling displaced by the influx of tourists and compatriots. Palau celebrated the conclusion of the 2025 Pacific Mini Games, where Tahiti topped the medal count with a total of 142 medals, 72 gold, 41 silver, and 29 bronze. In New Zealand, Pacific data experts are warning that reforms to community-level data collection will fail Pacifica communities. Papua New Guinea is experiencing a surge in violence, spreading from previously restricted provinces to new locations. Greece will suspend asylum applications from migrants arriving from Libya after more than 2,000 migrants landed on Crete. The United States has announced new tariffs on goods from Iraq, Brazil, the Philippines, and over 20 other countries. Finally, the Cook Islands are implementing a ban on plastic bags. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.